and welcome to Outdoorsy, the podcast that is redefining and reclaiming the term outdoorsy for everyone. I'm your host, Madeline. Now, you might be watching this video episode on YouTube. If so, hey, hello, you get to see my cute little baby bump. If you are listening to audio, sorry, you're missing out. I don't know what to tell you. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody for tuning into these bonus episodes of Outdoorsy, kind of in between seasons. It's been this awkward phase of me just being so busy to coordinate different interviews with people. So I've just been independently producing episodes on topics that I find interesting. So hopefully you're finding these episodes interesting as well. I'm having fun doing a lot of research and producing them for you. Today's topic is one that I have been asked about a lot, and I finally sat down and did the research and compiled it all together for you. But basically, as my platform has grown and continued to expand beyond the borders of the United States, that's the beauty of social media, people have asked me a lot of questions about leave no trace and outdoor ethics and recreating responsibly in the great outdoors in other countries. If you didn't know this, because I actually didn't really think too much about this before, I didn't realize how much of a US mindset I have when it comes to talking about outdoor ethics. Like, it's very American. I did not realize that leave no trace policies were pretty much exclusive to America. But I want to just really make sure I emphasize to everybody that, yes, the leave no trace, 7 principles and the specific rules were created to help guide American United States outdoor recreation. A lot of the framework and kind of way of thinking and approaching the outdoors that's presented in the leave no trace principles is applicable everywhere, right? So there's a ton of really important lessons that we learn through leave no trace that apply no matter where you are. So I'm going to go through some of the differences between, here in the United States versus other countries, and kind of share some of that information with you because I think it's really interesting. I did a lot of research independently from really credible sources. I also asked my followers to kind of chime in if they've had any experiences recreating in different countries, and got a lot of great anecdotal feedback. So both of those things kind of combine to give you a more holistic picture. But again, I have not had the privilege of going on any outdoor adventures in the world outside of the United States. So there's maybe some stuff that I get wrong in this. And if that's the case, please let me know in the comments, and I'll make sure that I add a correction or addendum to the blog post that I put out on the same topic. The blog post is going to be linked in the show notes. So if you are wondering where I'm getting any of my information from, I have all of the sources cited and linked in that blog post. Again, that will be linked in the show notes. So you can just click there, read the article, click through all the different facts and stats and all those things, and find the actual sources. So, I'm not just making things up or only regurgitating information strangers on the internet told me. Everything's been backed up and verified from credible sources. So check that out if you would like. So let's talk first about staying on the trail versus wandering off the trail, because this is one question I get quite a bit whenever I post about how important it is for us to stay on designated trails and not wander off. There are always people in my comments who are like, that's not a rule where I live. That's not the case. Or I'll get people out in Alaska who are like, there are no trails, I don't understand. What do you mean? So this really was eye-opening for me. Of course, the heart of leave no trace remains the same in all of these places, right? Respect the land, make sure you're not doing any harm, those kinds of things. But there are different rules depending on what regions and areas you are. So in the United States, as I've talked about a lot on my podcast, on my various platforms, our national park system, our public park systems, our state parks, we have incredible public park access built into the infrastructure of the United States. And that's not the case everywhere. We are really lucky that there is such an established network of trails. This is why it's important for us to stay on those trails, is because they have been established, and going off of them kind of is unnecessary and creates more harm. Now, again, I say the United States like it's a sweeping thing. Very different in Alaska, for example. In Alaska, they don't have as many established trails. And actually, the guidance that is given to people hiking in these areas when there are not trails, or maybe there's only a really narrow pathway, especially if you're with a group, is to walk in a horizontal line. So not one by one in single file, but instead kind of spread out your impact. And that is because there aren't these established pathways and foot trails. So they want to minimize impact. So by spreading out, you're kind of spreading out that minimal impact rather than just belaboring the same path over and over and over, if that makes sense. So that's like an exception in the United States with trails. And that's the case in other places too. I think like the development of social trails or like desire paths is always kind of frowned upon everywhere because that is a result of damaging flora and fauna in the area. But if you're just aiming to minimize impact, that might look different in some places. In the United States, it means staying on the established trails because we have so many. There's really no reason to go off trail. But in other places, you're encouraged to go off of trail to minimize your impact, which I think is just interesting. It's like a perfect example of what I mean when I say leave no trace principles put you into a box of like, the rule is you must stay on trail. Like, that's not the rule. The rule is that you want to travel and camp on durable surfaces and minimize your impact and your harm. So while the rule of staying on trail isn't necessarily applicable everywhere, the ethos of like, hey, let's minimize impact when we're hiking, that applies everywhere. Another great example of the differences in kind of how we approach certain rules where it's not quite black and white, where there's some gray area. So when we think about meadows and wildflowers, like wildflowers in particular, I feel like are such a hot topic with everybody, as it should be. I mean, it's a hot topic with me. I talk about it every single year and I get really heated when I talk about it, but for good reason, right? Because we in America have all of these beautiful alpine meadows. Like if you think of Mount Rainier National Park, there's these gorgeous wildflower fields that are protected because they are fragile ecosystems and just very, very fragile in general. So like one footstep can cause incredible long lasting damage. But in other parts of the world, certain types of flowers and meadows and wildflowers are not as fragile and they're not as protected. So again, big difference between someone frolicking around in the wildflower fields at Mount Rainier National Park as opposed to somebody frolicking around in a wildflower field in Switzerland on private farmland that's about to be mowed, right? Like I see pictures of people abroad where they're frolicking in fields of wildflowers, and I'm always like, that doesn't look like, I don't think they should be doing that. That looks wrong. But I was just talking to somebody that I know that was like, no, seriously, like a lot of these pictures that you see, the cows are about to eat those wildflowers. So it's like really okay for people to be frolicking around in them because they're going to be gone tomorrow. Or another really good example, I was talking to my friend Emily, who's an incredibly talented photographer. I have her information linked below. I asked her specifically about Iceland because she has all these incredible photos. I'm sure you've seen somebody on Instagram somewhere post the like famous purple lupin fields in Iceland, and people are always like frolicking around in those wildflower meadows. And I every single time I've seen those, I've been like, wait, that's not allowed. What are we doing? Wait, like I've always been so stressed when I see that. And I was just on Emily's Instagram the other day and I saw one of her pictures of her in Iceland, and I was like, Emily is one of the most ethical photographers I know. There's no way she would be taking this photo if it wasn't allowed. So I asked her and I was like, what is the deal with these lupins in Iceland and why are everybody like just not caring about leave no trace? And she was like, well, actually it's like super different there because it's not that people aren't practicing leave no trace. It's that those specific flowers are incredibly invasive. They are non-native and basically they're causing a bunch of issues locally. So they don't really care if you're tromping around in them. They don't really care if you're picking them. The rules are completely different because of the nature of those flowers and how they're interacting with the local environment. So I actually wanted to like figure out some more information about this, like figure out what was going on. So these lupins actually were introduced to Iceland from, I was reading, from Alaska in the 1940s. So they're not native to Iceland and they were brought over originally to like solve some ecological problems. But then they started spreading super aggressively and started threatening native species and local ecosystems. and they cannot eradicate them. They've become like a huge problem. And so they are fine with visitors coming through, stomping through those meadows, picking those flowers, and doing all of that because they don't really care what happens to those flowers. Caveat is please don't pick those flowers and then move them to a different spot. And please wipe off your shoes and clean your clothes before you travel to another location because you could potentially be transferring the seeds to other areas when it's like we're trying to minimize and contain the impact of these. So, like, be mindful, but when you're there, go crazy. Like, do whatever. So it is just interesting. You really have to know what the rules and regulations are and what the local impact would be of your behavior in certain areas. So I thought that was really interesting. So overall, the hard and fast rules for how you should behave in wildflower meadows isn't black and white. Like, it's not black and white. It's not a concrete rule wherever you go. It really depends on where you are. However, once again, just like how going off trail or staying on trail really depends on the region you're in, there are some universal truths that we can apply to help guide our behavior to make sure that we're being as ethical and responsible as possible. So, staying on official trails whenever possible, of course, is just going to be the best practice when visiting other wildflower fields. Again, just because you don't want to get the seeds like on your shoes and your clothing and accidentally spread them somewhere else, even if they are invasive. For the most part, again, usually you don't want to pick wildflowers. Exceptions exist, like if it's explicitly saying go for it, like with these fields, go for it. But for the most part, rule of thumb, just like leave whatever you see in nature there. Like, just whatever you see, just leave it be. Respecting wildlife, respecting local homes and trails and roads is also important. So if you're wanting to like get pictures of these wildflower fields and stuff, make sure, if it's private property, you have permission to go on that private property. If you need to park on the side of the road to get access to this field, make sure that you're, following all viable traffic laws, things like that. Like, just be mindful of the surrounding area that you're in. And then finally, and this is like, it's another super nuanced piece of this, is consider the impact of what you're sharing online. So, for example, with my friend Emily, she is talking about leave no trace and outdoor ethics like all the time, whether that's in her captions of her posts or other ways, or having one-on-one conversations. So she's posting stories. Like, she's a fierce advocate for leave no trace. So when I saw a photo of her in wildflowers tagged in another country, my first thought wasn't, Emily is violating leave no trace. No, my first thought was, oh, Emily must know something I don't know. And that is the key important differentiator here, because if you're just willy-nilly posting photos of you frolicking around in every wildflower field that you see, your followers, if they're based in the United States, might not know that you're in a different country and that the rules are different. Like, they might not know that. Hell, I didn't know that until I like researched further. And so they might see you exhibiting behavior like that and think that it's then okay to apply to wildflower fields in the United States. So it's important that you are consistently educating your audience about leave no trace, or at least explaining what's going on in your caption of your photo or your video, just to give people some additional context of like, hey, this was okay here because of X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of nuances to like the digital side of leave no trace, and I could talk about that for a very long time. And in fact, I have another podcast episode and YouTube video and blog post that dive really in depth into that particular topic. So if you want to learn more about digital leave no trace, I highly encourage you go check that out. Next up, we have the cultural and spiritual significance of certain areas and how that impacts your outdoor ethics and recreating responsibly. There are certain land practices that are sacred, and it depends on where you're at in the world how these things impact your interactions as well. If you are not Indigenous or if you are not of that religion, there are certain things that you need to be aware of. And this is something that I've thought deeply about as somebody who is white in America, thinking about how land stewardship is vastly different from a colonial perspective as opposed to an indigenous led perspective. I've thought about that a lot. I've done a lot of research learning about different ways that indigenous peoples encourage land stewardship differently than what we've been taught from a colonial perspective. And it's really important to keep in mind because again, I elaborate further on this in my podcast episode about like leave no trace specifically in America. I talk about how a lot of these principles and rules do not apply to Indigenous communities and are actually contradictory to Indigenous land practices. So, like, it's really important to consider that as well. Like, there's always going to be caveats and nuance there. But I also wanted to like talk about some other specific examples of spiritual differences, like in Nepal, for example, like they have rock stacks, which are called cairns, and a lot of them hold spiritual significance. And I can't speak to exactly the details or like the reason why, but like mostly in people who practice Buddhism, there's like spiritual ties to these rock stacks that symbolize like balance and an offering to the land and all this stuff. And sometimes people will tie clothing or flags to these rock stacks. And if you were to see that in America, you know, we learned that rock stacking, according to Leave No Trace, is unethical because it disturbs local environments, it can harm native species, and it can also be confusing when there are official cairns set up for official navigation. If you're doing rock stacking, it can kind of mess those things up. So, from a United States American perspective, you might go to Nepal, see all these rock stacks, even see this quote unquote litter attached to them and be like, oh no, they're violating Leave No Trace and do something about it. Like if you were to knock one of those rock stacks over, that would be a huge taboo because there, that is not unethical. Doing those rock stacks, creating those cairns is not unethical. In fact, it's sacred. So if you were to mess with them or do something about them, it's not being culturally sensitive and aware. And it's really important for us to basically do the research before we go into these areas that have cultural and spiritual significance to other people and be mindful of that and respectful of it. I want to circle back to Indigenous land stewardship because this also applies outside the United States, right? Like we know that there are colonized countries all over the world. And it's important for us to remember that the original stewards of the land, the indigenous people there, know how to care for the land much better than any colonizer because they've been doing it forever and also continue to practice their cultural, and they also deserve to have their cultural relationship to the land and to nature respected and honored. So I just wanted to touch on some of the differences specifically in the United States with Leave No Trace and kind of the relationship we have to the land and how Indigenous people often interact with the land that might be like technically, if you were to look at the, you know, line by line, black and white of Leave No Trace might be in violation. But like, again, it's not applicable here because we should not be applying these very colonial mindset, colonial rules of Leave No Trace to Indigenous people. It just should not apply to them. So a really good example is like in certain areas, the land is like sacred and ceremonial, and oftentimes Indigenous people will leave offerings. And in Leave No Trace, you know, you're not supposed to leave anything and you're not supposed to take anything. And sometimes Indigenous people are taking plants or they're taking flowers, they're taking things from the land to incorporate into their own culture, or they're leaving offerings. And both of these things would quote unquote technically violate Leave No Trace, but they've been doing this for forever. We should not be policing what they are doing because ultimately they're the original stewards of the lands. We should be following their guidance and respecting their cultural norms. So it doesn't apply here. Finally, one of the things I want to talk about is like where you can go, because that's always a big piece of Leave No Trace is like making sure that you have the right permits and the right permissions and yada, yada, yada. In the United States, like private property laws are like really strict. Like if you go and accidentally stumble upon someone's private property, you could get shot. Like it's not good. You want to be really careful of that. But in other countries, it's not as strict. It's a little bit different. So like in Scotland, they have this thing called right to roam. And it's protected by the Land Reform Act of 2003, which basically gives people broad access to most land and inland water for recreational purposes. They still have restrictions, like there's certain restrictions and stuff, but it just is interesting that they have like this really specific thing that's like, no, you have a right to all of this land, which is different than what we're used to in America. Other places in the UK, and if you're watching the video episode, I'm looking down at my notes because this is all stuff that's like brand new to me. In the UK, particularly in England and Wales, the right to roam laws are different. So different than they are in Scotland. So it's a lot more limited. And I was actually hearing from somebody that, in England, there's really not much wild camping. So not much dispersed camping or camping outside of super established campgrounds. So that was really interesting. But they do have a lot of trails. Like they have a lot of trail systems, which is great. And yeah, they encourage people to follow standard rules of leave no trace, like pick up your trash, don't do any harm, don't take things from the landscape, that kind of thing. They also have the open access land under the CROW or CROW Act, which allows off path walking in designated areas. Like, I think most of the comments I've gotten from people who are like, I go off trail all the time, have been from people who are in the UK, are in Scotland, or are in Alaska. And that's because some of these rules differ. But the one cool thing was that I saw that England does have this like countryside code, and it's like the government backed code of ethics for responsible recreation, which is kind of cool because like Leave No Trace is an independent nonprofit in the United States. It's not government backed at all. Like the government doesn't really give a shit or like have principles for you to follow. So it's kind of cool to see that they have like government support for outdoor ethics. In Norway and Sweden, they have a lot of different protections as well. So public access is protected under the Outdoor Recreation Act. It has a different name. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it because I'll just embarrass myself and butcher it. But it basically ensures people's right to hike, camp, and forage responsibly. And then oh God, I can't pronounce this either. There's another thing. I'll put the words on the screen if you're watching the video episode. But there's another thing that's like basically the right to roam. And that says you're allowed to camp on uncultivated land for up to 2 nights or longer in remote areas, provided you're at least 150 meters from buildings and treat the land and others with respect. So it's just kind of cool to see like how these different places control but also allow access to land. Looking at other specific examples of global outdoor ethics, again, Leave No Trace has spread internationally for sure and has impacted some of these areas. Some of these areas probably had these ethos and ethics before Leave No Trace was officially a thing. But I just want to share some other places that have like written rules and expectations. So like in Canada, Crown Land, I didn't know what this was, but Crown Land makes up about 89% of the country. And that's available for recreational use and camping, which is pretty damn cool. You just have to follow like restrictions in general, like you would anywhere, I guess. But they're really open to Leave No Trace. Like they really embrace Leave No Trace. One of my followers was telling me like, the slogans of like, whatever you pack in, you pack out, leave nothing but footsteps. Like those slogans are like ingrained in everybody's brains in Canada. So they really, really follow it. And it's kind of like in their DNA to make sure that they're following Leave No Trace and respecting the land. New Zealand also has a version of Leave No Trace that they practice, but then they also are like really strict on biosecurity, which basically means like when they have visitors coming in and leaving, they're asked to clean their gear upon, entry or departure to make sure that they are not spreading invasive species, which I thought was just like really interesting. I wish that we did this in the United States as well, and other places. I think that's amazing. But yeah, it's I've kind of talked about like all the good things about other places, but I did get a lot of comments from people who have hiked and camped in other places and said that they don't follow any kind of set of principles or guiding ethics to help them pick up after themselves and take care of the land, which is like, it's really disheartening to hear. Like somebody was saying that in one area, I'm not going to say exactly where, but in one area, they're actually encouraged to leave trash to like tell people that this is a place they can camp. And that's just like crazy to me because we have the internet. We can just like share that without trashing it. I don't know why you would need to leave trash to tell people it's okay to camp. But I digress. I think that the other limitation that's also like important for us to consider is that a lot of places in the world do not have the infrastructure or the government support to help clean up, maintain, and care for trails, for campgrounds, for even like garbage pickup. And so when they lack this kind of infrastructure and support, it is a lot easier for people to just kind of throw their hands up and say, well, fuck it. I don't really care. I'm not going to care for the land if the government's not going to help us out, or if there are no services to help support this, and I'm not going to pick up after other people. And so it just creates this kind of toxic culture of like, well, if they're not picking up, I'm not going to pick up. And that's really sad. Like, that's really disappointing to hear. But again, we have to understand that like different cultures just have different ways of being. And we just have to understand that. So when you go and travel out to other countries and you see something different or you witness something different, don't be like, oh my God, that violates Leave No Trace. These are bad people. Remember instead, every culture, every region in the world treats things like caring for the land, caring for nature very differently. And we need to be open to learning about those things. Even if you're like, wow, this really sucks. They really shouldn't do this. This is obviously harming native species. It's also not your culture and it's not your place to dictate or say what they should and shouldn't do. Instead, just say, this was an interesting learning experience for me, and it has reinforced in my person my desire to take care of the land and how much I want to do that when I go places. And isn't that special? Instead of just judging other places for being different. And then it also reinforces this idea of like, one of the most important aspects of being a good outdoorsman, outdoorswoman is planning ahead and preparing. Like, that is the number one principle of Leave No Trace. And that's it for a reason. It's applicable wherever we go, whether or not these places are taking care of the land or not, or if they have significant cultural norms that are different than ours, or if there's really important spiritual practices that we need to be aware of. Everybody has something different, and it's on us, the individual, especially if you're a tourist, to research, plan ahead and prepare and know the area that you're going to recreate and follow those rules. Even if they're different, even if you don't necessarily agree with them, it's not up to you. You need to respect the local people that live there. But ultimately, again, I kind of want to circle back to what I was talking about at the beginning. Leave No Trace is really easy if you want to just like put blinders on and be like, these are hard and fast rules. It's black and white. You can do this, you can't do that. But if you want to actually take a step back and look at the reason why Leave No Trace exists, it's really just a mindset. It's a framework of thinking rather than a set of hard and fast rules, right? So those kind of guiding principles are: pick up after yourself. Don't leave trash everywhere. Don't urinate and poop wherever. Like, pick up after yourself. That's number one. That's going to be applicable anywhere and everywhere you go. The next thing is going to be just respecting wildlife and local flora and fauna. So making sure that you understand, like, oh, is there a breeding season right now? Do I need to be aware of certain animals? Or how do I approach this type of wildflower field? Am I allowed to go in it? Thinking ahead of these things and being respectful of the local wildlife and flora and fauna, because they obviously can't speak for themselves. Just do some research on that. It'll be interesting anyways to kind of know what you're looking at and know what you're going to expect. Leave natural and unnatural stuff as is. When in doubt, just leave things as it is. Unless it's trash, of course, right? Like, if you see a rock stack in a different country, leave it. Just leave it. Don't do anything to disturb it. If you see what looks like artifacts, leave it. If you see inscriptions on a wall, just leave it. Take a picture, sure, but leave it. Don't add to it. Don't deface it further. Like, just leave stuff as they are and appreciate them for what they are. Another piece of this is just like being respectful of other people. Like, you might be on a trail that's going through private land in a different country. You might be walking through somebody's farm and their house is 200 meters away. So like, keeping your voice down, being respectful of other people, being respectful and quiet and calm and just kind when you're interacting with these other people and using their land is so important. And then finally is this concept of the digital leave no trace. Don't geotag sensitive spots that can't handle an influx of people coming to visit. Because if you're a tourist and you geotag a hidden gem that's like very fragile, hard to get to, or needing some extra protections, and your video goes viral, and all of a sudden a ton of tourists end up flocking to this like local hidden gem, that's really damaging, not only to the local people and the local culture, but also to those natural ecosystems, the wildlife, the flora, and the fauna. So think through what you're sharing online as well, because it does have an impact. So if you plan on traveling outside of the United States and embarking on an outdoor adventure, here are the couple of things that you just need to do. Check with official sources, right? So check with national park offices, with rangers, with tourism boards, with the official government websites of wherever you're going, and make sure you're following the rules and regulations to a T. Talk to local people, right? Like talk to local rangers, talk to people at the local pub, ask questions, like just be open to chit chatting with other people on the trail. Just talk to people and ask them like, hey, is this normal? Like I noticed that we're going through someone's farmland. Is that okay? Like just ask questions, be curious, because you might get to learn something new. And I think that's just the beauty of traveling and going outside of the United States. Another important thing is to follow and respect cultural and indigenous areas. So like make sure that you are following whatever rules and regulations are there based on, if you are on tribal land, the rules are going to be different for you than if you are on public land in the US, for example. So just again, research, plan, prepare, look stuff up, check with official sources, and you should be good to go. Again, this is not like there's no hard and fast rules. It's not like a list of rules you have to memorize. It's all about kind of the general ethics and mindset of going out and exploring nature. Ultimately, nature is not this like commodity to be exploited. It's something that we have a relationship to. We should be caring for it no matter where we are in the world. And sometimes that looks different depending on the region, the actual like application of that care and of that respect might be slightly different, but ultimately just use that as your moral compass when you are like, I don't know what to do. Always lean back on just caring for the land. We're taking care of it because it's important, because it's sacred, and that's our responsibility. And that will help guide you whenever you have questions, whenever you're not sure what to do. Just try to minimize harm, minimize impact, and remember that nature is not a commodity for us to exploit. So anyways, this was like a really interesting topic for me to research into. Again, I hope this was interesting and informative for you to listen to as well, and not just for me. Maybe I'm the only one that's going to listen to this podcast later, but I don't know. I think that it's really cool to learn about different cultures and how different people interact with the land in different areas of the country. I feel like I learned so much. So if you learned a lot too, can you please go and subscribe to this podcast, give it 5 stars, and all of that jazz? I would really, really appreciate that. And everybody listening to this right now, if you're listening to audio version, you're already subscribed to Patreon. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can subscribe to me on Patreon and you can get exclusive access to ad-free episodes, so you don't have to deal with like YouTube ads and stuff. And bonus content as well, but you'll also gain access to the Outdoorsy Discord server, which is like our community of outdoorsy folks who just kind of have found each other and found this like really great community of people who haven't really identified with the traditional like outdoorsy label. And you also get access to the dates, times, information about Cozy Camping Club meetups. So that is exclusively only for Patreon subscribers. But basically we just meet up in the great outdoors. So if you're local to Washington State, you can come hang out with us. And we just hang in the outdoors. No crazy hike, no giant adventure, just spending time together in community in the outdoors. And it's lovely. So the only way you can figure out where the next one is and when it is by subscribing to Patreon. So check that out. For everybody else who is subscribed to Patreon, thank you so much. I love you. I am so excited for our next 2 meetups. It's going to be so much fun. But until next time, I hope that everybody gets out there, gets outside, gets into nature in a way that makes sense to them, feels good to them. And just remember that you belong out there.